don't think there is a final goal and an end to history, but speaking relative to the history of the past 4,000 or 5,000 years, I think the goal is, as I said, to invert the relationship of body and soul so that the body becomes an image in the imagination and the soul becomes an exteriorized solid state piece of circuitry which maintains everything else in stasis. And I'm not sure if people even realize what I'm picturing in my mind when I say this, but I think that the destiny of man and what man will make be his destiny just because of how we are is release into the imagination. And this is what all our after-death scenarios say, whether they are true or not, and they may be true. And this is what poetry aspires to, art aspires to. It's release into the imagination. We are creatures of the dream. And once this is articulated with sufficient clarity, and it's happening now, but I think the work we do with these drugs, we are the earliest pioneers in what over the next 100 years will lead to an understanding of consciousness almost as a thing apart from the monkey body and brain. We are consciousness. We may not always be monkeys. We fear the dehumanizing effect of so many computers and emotions, euphoric emotions not related to sex and all these things. We fear them. We say we are moving further and further from nature, deeper and deeper into our own psyche. But this is a dualism. Our psyche is nature. And we cannot move away from nature by exploring these places. So I believe, that a technological recreation of the after-death state is what history pushes toward. And that means a kind of eternal existence where there is an ocean of mind into which one can dissolve and reform from, but there is also the self, related to the body image, but in the imagination, so that we each would become, in a sense, everyone. I would live at Versailles, and you might live at the Taj Mahal, and someone else might live at Buckingham Palace, but what you would see, if there were an exterior observer, what you would see is only that man had become a coral reef of circuitry in space and on the planetary surface. But this is a very extreme view of the history of man because it's essentially Gnostic. It says we are not now what we yearn to be and are destined to be. We are not. I don't see history as a process of accepting and coming to terms with monkeyhood. I see that it will inevitably seek to transform and transcend monkeyhood. And this will be very frightening. I mean, it's frightening. Imagine if even a 15th century person were to be in this room with us, and the value systems, the clash of assumptions about what is important and unimportant. And this will be a much more intense change, and whether it is good or bad rests on a question that I have no answer for. And the question is man good? And this, I maintain, is the central thing to dig at, and we cannot know, and there's evidence pro and con. I have the faith that man is good, so I don't fear this future. But if someone had a doubt, even a small doubt about that, then they would be repelled by this. And I take all these movements which want zero-sum growth and reject technology, reject space colonization, reject drug experimentation as artificial. these people would be very alarmed by this kind of a point of view, but they do not seem to realize that the momentum toward this kind of thing is now so great in terms of human culture and that sort of thing that there can be no turning back. We are either going to change into this cybernetic, hyperdimensional, hallucinogenic angel, or we are going to destroy ourselves. The opportunity for us to be happy hunters and gatherers integrated into the balance of nature, that fell away 15,000 years ago and cannot be recaptured. I think Gerard O'Neill made it in answer to this very objection. He said, the earth is the cradle of mankind. There is no question about that. But you do not remain in the cradle forever. And this is a birth crisis that we're going through. For the entirety of human history has been the story of the monkey becoming the flying saucer. And it is taking just that long in geological time. But we, for some strange reason, happen to be living through the final moments of that process right now. And it is a turbulent, chaotic, multidimensional metamorphosis that is... there's never been anything like it on this planet before. It's absolutely astonishing. Information which was locked for kiliocosms of time into the DNA of plants and animals has, through the hand and articulate voice of man, been able to bootstrap itself out of the DNA and into these culturally validated, rapidly operating electromagnetic codes and languages, and this is allowing its development, its evolution, to proceed at a rate so fast that the transformation is taking place essentially in our lifetime. And psilocybin is central to this because psilocybin casts a spotlight into the darkness into which we are moving and shows that this is what lies there. It is the human soul, essentially, the oversoul of mankind, calling history toward itself across the dimensions. And it's taking only a moment, but on the other hand, it's taking 20,000 years. And it is the great adventure of becoming, and we are very, very privileged to be in this final ticking out of the last seconds of the third act.
Do you have any comments about the fact that DMT is located in the human brain?
Well, I think that puts, in some senses, a strong piece of evidence for the argument that I've been making. Not only is DMT endogenous in the brain, but beta-carbolines of the sort that occur in ayahuasca are endogenous in the brain as well. These things, as I mentioned this morning, the shift of a single atom on the ring structure of one of these molecules can cause a compound to go from inert to highly active. Well, that means then that it's probably very reasonable to say that we are as close to shifting the level of endogenous hallucinogens in our head, we are probably only a one-gene mutation away from that happening. And if you know anything about how biological evolution works, it isn't that a change, a mutation occurs, and the mutation is found to be better adapted than the previous form, and hence the mutation dominates. That is not the way evolution works. The way it works is you have the normal expression of the genotype in a population, and then you have mutations being thrown up all the time, and they are usually quenched, except in the situation where the environment shifts so that new selective pressures are operating in the environment. When new selective pressures begin to operate, a gene that was previously without consequence may suddenly have immense consequences. So then every member of the population that you're looking at that has that gene suddenly is in a much more advantageous position to advance their evolutionary strategy. And I think that certainly modern existence has changed the selective pressures on the human genome. And now it is people who are far out, that's simply a gloss. It is the people who are far out who are gaining advantage in the evolutionary jostling for efficacious strategies. And this, you're right, Frank, this is happening on the hardware level, on the level of endogenous tryptamines and that sort of thing. I think schizophrenia is essentially, in a way, a disease of modern times, and it is, though it's always existed, of course, but the incidence of it and the incidence of schizoid, if not schizophrenic, personalities and types is because the modalities of evolutionary selection are shifting. It's as though if you think of a rainforest that has been above water 200 million years, all evolutionary niches have become occupied. Everything is at steady state. There is not going to be any dramatic radiation of a new species because everything has been worked out and the energy flows are so tight, nothing can gain a leg up on that situation. But if you clear 1,000 acres of forest and reduce it to rubble, essentially open land, then what are called invader species come in there, and they very quickly gain dominance, where in the jungle, at steady state, you never see those plants. You never see weedy, annual, heavily seeding plants in the jungle. The jungle strategy is for enormous plants which produce small numbers of seeds. And this is, again, an analogy to the modern situation, that modernity is a desert, and we are jungle monkeys, and so new evolutionary selective pressures are coming to bear upon the human situation. New ideas are coming to the fore. Psilocybin is a selective filter for this. The wish to go to space is a selective filter for this. Just the wish to know your own mind is a selective filter for this. But this is part of the picture. This is what's happening. It's inevitable. It's a very good thing, I think, if you have faith that man is good. And I follow the Renaissance Platonists on that. I think man must be the measure of all things. What else could possibly serve with certainty? So that's all I would say about that.
You stated earlier that psilocybin is coming from outer space, or that there's a possibility that this mushroom is...
There's a possibility of that. Fred Hoyle and an associate of his have come to my aid on this, saying that spore-bearing life forms, because spores have the capacity to survive in the conditions of outer space, that spore-bearing life forms may, over truly large scales of time, percolate out through the galaxy and serve as a basis for the evolution of life on various planets, or insert themselves into already existing planetary ecologies and insert themselves there. On these matters of specific fact, like is the mushroom an extraterrestrial and that sort of thing, I haven't the faintest idea. The mushroom itself is such a mercurial, elusive, Zen sort of personality that I never believe a word it says. I simply entertain its notions and try and sort through them. And I found that to be the most enriching approach to it. To know that the option of believing that is there on hard evidence is very exhilarating. As to what is really going on, The mushroom assures me that I haven't got even the faintest grip on what is really going on. But something is going on.
Can I ask another question?
Maybe the
last one.
Sure.
What do you think is evil? And can these mushrooms be misused?
Well, I think anything can be misused. Most evil is trivial. And if I could speak off the top of my head, the only evil that associates itself with mushrooms is taking it but taking too little. In other words,
did you find evil?
evil is there's a word I want. It isn't twiddle, but it's something like that. Evil is when you play at things, not in play in the Hindu cosmic sense, but where you fiddle with things, you muck with things because you don't want to get your feet wet. You want to be able to say you've done these things, but you never want to really place your validity on the line. And I am amazed at the number of people who claim familiarity with psychedelic drugs, who, when you actually question them closely, it's very clear that they had a sub-threshold dose. Even if they've taken it 50 or 100 times, they have managed through low doses and strong defenses to always keep the demon at bay. That's a demon with a D-A-I, to keep the demon at bay, and they don't know what they're talking about. You must take a sufficiently large dose so that you enter into these places. Not to knock him personally, because he's a very nice man, but as an example, Roland Fisher, whose work you may know, I talked to him, and he has given psilocybin, he says, to about 15,000 people at NIMH, and now he's retired to Mallorca. But oh, you do? Yeah. And I said to him, Roland, what do you make of it? I mean, what do you make of it? And he said, well, make of what? And I said, well, what do you make just specifically of the hallucinations? You say you gave it to all these people, you took it 6 times. What happened when you closed your eyes and looked at the hallucinations? He said, I never closed my eyes. I was highly agitated throughout. And I just realized these things, which seem to me as natural as breathing, just slide right past people. I mean, of course you do not eat for a few hours before you do it. Of course you lie down in darkness and compose your mind and look at the darkness behind your eyelids. And of course you invoke it through the wish to have it come to you. These are things as simple as they can be, yet here was a man with a lifelong professional involvement in it, published dozens of papers, has made contributions in the mapping of consciousness, but he could never just stop fidgeting long enough to see it. So my idea of that as evil is anything which trivializes a mystery would be evil. And since this is a mystery, any dismissing of it or constantly taking it at low doses for hedonic purposes, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the whole story, and nobody should think that gives you a pedestal from which to speak about it. You really have to do these heroic amounts and integrate them. This is something I haven't even talked about in this interview, but these things are very state-bounded, a term which Roland Fisher, in fact, coined. That simply means that they're very hard to retain and remember what exactly happened at the peak of the flash, and you come down and you say, well, it was very strange, there was information, there were entities, but I just can't get back to it. The way to overcome that is to be as psychedelic in your down life as possible. And by psychedelic, I mean ideas, cognitive activities. You should dance, you should read, you should think, you should paint, you should sculpt, you should converse, you should constantly involve yourself in cognitive activities, because taking these drugs is one of the major cognitive activities. And then, if you have a grip on human history, where the human enterprise has been, where it's going, if you have been many places, it's easier to map. I'm reminded of, there's an alchemical aphorism, I think it's attributed to Athanasius Kirchner, where he says, the oldest books, the farthest countries, the deepest forests, the highest mountains. This is where you must seek the stone. And what he means is you must simply acquire experience, because it is only in the acquisition of acquired experiences that you have a reservoir to draw on when you seek to make metaphors and analogies about the alien thing. When you invoke the God, then you can map back onto it and say, well, it's like this, it's like that, knowing that it is not that or this, but the fund of analogies is there to give you a grip on it. So there's an obligation to experience deeply and richly and thoroughly and intellectually, I might add. And then you can map back onto it. But it's a dialogue between you and it, where you are discovering new things about yourself and it, and trying to resolve the question, are we the same thing? And I haven't resolved the question. My suspicions flow one way and then another way. But I think it is without a doubt a living mystery existing in the presence, available to anyone sincere enough to seek it. And for me, that was a life-transforming discovery and revelation, because I didn't believe there were any mysteries. I believe there may have been once, but to discover one right in our midst, and it cannot be reduced, it cannot be pulled apart into its constituent functions. It is truly a unitary mystery, and it's accessible in our lives right now, without kneeling at anybody's feet, without following any regimen of denial or the assimilation of any belief system. And this is very big news, I think. The mystery has always been there, I'm sure, but our society is so bizarre and has led us so far astray that we have to rediscover it. And this process is happening. This is what the 20th century is all about. And we are still tiptoeing at the edge of it, even though great men, great women, great mappers of consciousness have come and gone. We are still at the very infancy of this thing. And it calls out to us, it beckons, it says, do more, see more, know more, and be more a part of it.
Well, during your talk, I thought about one experience that Rita and I had in India when we were at Elephanto Caves. We were looking at the lingam, and when you would look out of the caves, you could see across the bay, you could see an atomic plant. And these two things just looked really identical.
Well, the mushroom, could any symbol be more appropriate of the ambiguity of human transformation? What mushroom is it that grows at the end of history? Is it Stropharia cubensis, or is it the creation of Edward Teller? This is an unresolved problem.
What a group!
Is that good?
Oh, it's perfect.
Good.